this is about. So I'm Ari. Let's start with that. This is John, and this is another John. And we're here to talk about the 2012 presidential election in a historical perspective.
All right.
Okay, so it's a cliche, if you will, that usually will determine the outcome of an election is how great the economy is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's,
no question about it.
I think another important consideration would be the personality of the incumbent and the opponent also. That's a factor. I mean, the economy is not good right now, although it's getting better. You guys are old enough to remember the 1984 presidential election where the economy was, during Reagan's first term, for much of that it wasn't so great, and it was getting good towards...
That was the What's Your Beef election with
with
Gary,
Mondale.
Mondale and Hart. Yeah,
Hart.
What's Your Beef?
No, Geraldine, well, maybe in the primaries it was Hart.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, he was, I think, didn't Mondale say he was using the Wendy's slogan, where's the beef, or something he was referring to.
And I believe Jesse Jackson ran also.
That year, yeah, he did, but Mondale was the one that won.
That actually ultimately won, prevailed. Yeah.
Well, I guess there's also another similar example back in 1936 when Roosevelt wins by a landslide. I mean, the Great Depression was still going on, but things got a little bit better. You know, the government, in a contrived way through the New Deal, gets more people jobs, so that...
WPA?
Yeah, and I think people were just ready to have some major modifications towards the traditional laissez-faire capitalistic system in this country at that point. So in light of those factors, I see a lot of similarity between that and what's happening right now with Obama. Things feel better in general, although they're not great. And that doesn't mean that these massive debt may come to haunt us in the future, but...
What do you think, we're ready for a New Deal?
It's not quite as popular now as it was back then.
Whether it's popular or not, is it something that really should be something we should be considering now? Something major to overhaul our economic and social economic system to take account of all of the problems that we have. With the debt, the deficit, it's a really serious situation.
The experts would be the economists, and you got the Keynesian economists, and you got the monetarists like Milton Friedman, those guys. And obviously, a lot of the public likes what the monetarists have to say, and I guess guys, the Keynesians like Paul Krugman of the New York Times, they have their followers too. But I think that if we're going to have another type of New Deal or Great Society type thing, it helps if there's a broad political consensus around it.
There isn't anything like that now, unfortunately.
Right, so I don't think it would be too sound to go into that sort of stuff.
Well, what about...
I just want to mention that my background is machining.
Yes.
I've been a machinist most of my life.
Yes.
Although I am a college-educated person, I'm not trying to throw that out as some big impressive thing. It's just that I'm somebody who's had a fair amount of education, and I enjoy history. I actually have a degree in American history.
Oh, good.
And I do enjoy looking at the current events, and I often say I want to live another 20 years just to see what's going to happen next.
Right.
But on a more serious note, getting back to the manufacturing aspect, okay, I'm in specialty machining. We make parts basically for the food and airplane industry. So I am in a particular niche, okay? The widespread manufacturing is virtually dead. Okay, And for many, many years, this didn't happen overnight, but for many, many years, a lot of items such as the clothes, the shoes I'm wearing, the socks, probably were not made here at all, okay? And the thing I find a little frustrating is that you have American companies that have their corporate offices here, the main corporate offices, yet the actual manufacturing plants will be overseas, okay? And Western Europe is being affected by this too, okay? Companies that were long-term companies in England and France, even in Eastern Europe, okay, they are farming out their work to the Far East. Okay, so this is not...
It's a worldwide phenomenon.
It's a worldwide phenomenon. And I think that, just to finish up here, I think it's very... it's been the nature of the beast of business that you will chase the cheaper, yet somewhat qualified labor, okay? And I'm noticing that although America has become a very service-oriented country, even with that, if you need help on a computer, very often you're speaking to somebody who is in India or some other country, and it's not any prejudice against them that I say this, but it just seems like even the service-oriented jobs, because of our technology, are leaving our shores too.
Yes.
And one of my nephews went to a futuristic seminar years ago when he was still in college, and John and I had discussed this to some length. The work of the world in general is taking fewer people to do it.
Right.
Okay, and so as years go by, year by year, you are having like people all over the world not having jobs because it's kind of like we don't have the jobs for them.
That's it. There's more and more people competing for fewer and fewer jobs. The legitimate jobs, actual work that really needs to be done, whether it's production or service. And those are the two things that are unfortunately being outsourced at this time.
Now, may I say your occupation, if you wish to divulge it?
Well, I mean, I do home improvement work, and that's something that really cannot be outsourced for the most part. You can't get some painter to come from a foreign country to paint your house and then go back home. They have to be here. You can insource labor, cheaper labor from South America or elsewhere, but they're here, then they're based here. But you can't actually outsource the jobs.
Also, Bert at the chess club, he does some custom-made work.
Bert?
Bert, yeah. You know Bert from the Bert Schiffman.
Oh, Schiffman. Oh, he hangs more at your club, or your old
yeah,
Kelmer. Okay.
But his job does these custom-made items. I don't remember precisely. And
yeah, he was a foreman in a factory. Yeah, is so. Yeah.
Okay, now going back to this jobs issue, to put it, I guess, more current times, but I'll try to think of past examples. We have that Trans-Canada pipeline in the Great Plains. They're talking about bringing that through Nebraska. By some estimates, they said they'll create 20,000 jobs, others 6,000. I don't know the exact number. But that's something that obviously... presumably that would involve American labor, although you might be able to get some immigrant to do it.
That might be a short-term interim solution to creating some jobs for some people. You have to look at the effect of oil is running down. We're reaching the end of the line for oil. It might be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50, and we have the global warming issue on top of that.
Yeah, there are I mean, you remember what happened in the Gulf Coast.
With the oil spill.
So there are the precaution factors involved. I mean, also they're going to build new nuclear reactors in Georgia, right?
But isn't that what we should be doing? Creating more potential scenarios like
a Chernobyl.
Chernobyl, but more recently in Japan. You have an earthquake, and then suddenly you have a catastrophe, and what do you do for all of these people who are dying of radiation?
And then let's go back to the New Deal when you had the federal government hiring these artists to showcase the Great Depression, and that was part of getting people back to work and spurring up the economy. Classic Keynesian type of approach to.
Although I think that it was helpful, and a lot of the federal parks we enjoy. Or can enjoy, were refurbished or simply built under these federal plans under OSOP.
Sure.
Now the thing is though, is that there's a big issue about cutting back things. Like for instance, Marge was telling me, my significant other, she was telling me that she heard or read in the paper that very soon the Saturday deliveries will be cut, like eliminated, for the post office.
Right,
okay?
Yeah, that's
all right,
true.
now, okay, I think it's a dilemma or a conundrum is that when things get cut back that are paid for by our taxes, such as federal employees, state employees, wages, and municipal, and so on, okay, you cut the budget so taxes won't have to be raised. But when budgets are cut, almost invariably, as with the post office, people will lose jobs. It's not just losing overtime. We're talking people losing jobs. Okay, now, okay, so you're holding the line on the taxes, but now you're going to have a bunch of people who have no work, and now they're going to be on the unemployment roll. See, I find it. I wish I could be more optimistic. I guess I seem very negative to people. I'd like to think I'm like an ultra realist.
You're resigned.
I resigned. It says downward spiral to things. Yeah. And people who've been out of work for a year or more, yes, a lot of them, and I don't mean this in any political sense, but a lot of them are getting jobs, perhaps in their field, but they're taking gigantic cuts in pay. Sure. My boss's wife was like an office, sort of like in the buying department for raw materials for like decorative things. Mm-hmm. She got a job in a similar way, a similar field, I should say, except her wage is less than half of what she was making. Right, okay? And I've been hearing things here and there from people. It's like, yeah, I got a job, and it is in my field, but boy, what a big cut in pay. What a slash in benefits. Yeah. And I'm hearing this story, so even with people getting re-employed, the problem is they're being re-employed with lower money, and I think the middle class is approaching the poor class.
Oh, absolutely. We're shrinking.
The shrinking
middle class is definitely shrinking.
Yeah.
Now, being the C-SPAN junkie that I am, and I enjoy watching the Washington Journal, and of course I listen to what some of these candidates, I'm thinking in particular a guy like Rick Perry or Ron Paul. I'm sure that if they were here, they would say, well, the solution is to get government out of the way. It's the government's fault with the shrinking pay and the higher unemployment. So, I guess it's kind of hard to prove counterfactuals like what would have happened had government not been in the way last year, the year before, this year.
Well, they would argue just let big business do whatever they want, but to some extent that's what we've allowed in the last two administrations prior to Obama, and by deregulation. And deregulating the banks, look what that led to, a catastrophe with the mortgage industry.
Right, it didn't, okay, there is an example where a lot of people would say it was the Community Reinvestment Act under Carter, right, but I have investor savings, no, it's Investors Bank now, I'm sorry. They didn't get into the subprime thing, they're solvent so far as I know. Yeah. So, but didn't affect all the banks, just because you had the shenanigans with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Yeah. But too many of them were gambling on the mortgages, and basically breaking them up into derivatives and all these other complicated investment products, and selling them and just all over the place,
jeopardizing the lives of regular Americans
and the regular people whose houses are basically lost now.
Well, it seemed to me that with this whole thing about the mortgages and all that, and these are not totally my own original thoughts on this, but I too like to look at the news, and I look at various points of view. I look at left-wing news, regular news, and right-wing news. But seriously, I honestly and truly, I'm trying to find it, but I tried to look at the full spectrum of the news. Well, it is what it is.
It is what it is, but I don't know if it's propaganda more than news, the right-wing stuff from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's more so.
Fox News in particular is not really news, it's noise.
And the WNBC I would like to think it's a little closer to the truth on things, you know. But, you know, the problem is, it's like, I think you have a lot of people, this might be a little more of a social commentary. I think everything is interconnected anyway.
Absolutely.
You know? And I think that you have a lot of people who hearken to what they felt was a simpler, more comfortable time. To exaggerate the point, some older men in their late 70s and early 80s and older would like to have the world be like it was in the 1950s.
Sure.
Right?
Simpler time.
And I remember, I'm going to expound on this a little bit. There's a black girl that I work with, okay, and she overheard these older guys talking about this, and she said, yeah, she's like a really tough type, but nice girl. And she said, yeah, back to the 50s, where I couldn't go into the same restaurant you were going, where I had to use a different toilet. In other words, this harking back to this simpler, more innocent time had a downside to it.
For some people.
For some
right, well, that Little Rock 9, I think, they tried as part of school integration, that took place in the late 50s, right? And Rosa Parks being on the front of the, insisting that she stay in the front, but that was also in the 50s. I mean, it's, on some level, it's kind of a myth that that time was really as great as think about.
Yeah, and I think the so-called ideal family, we may have had more dysfunction going on than some people realize. Oh, another comment I want to make about the mortgages before I forget it. Well, it seems to me that with the mortgage crisis, and it certainly has been a very, very terrible thing, I sincerely believe that a lot of people were convinced that they could own a house. And I think that there are people who, I know that there's so-called American dream, own a house, own that. I think there are some people who, unfortunately, if you will, are destined to just simply rent for the rest of their lives. They can still be happy, but not everybody. I don't think everybody has a right to own a house particularly. And I know that'd be a very unpopular thing to say, to whether you're right wing or left wing or whatever, or no wings. But the point is, I think that these people took unfair advantage of people who are not that educated.
Sure.
They BS them, if I can say that, into thinking that they could afford it. And with these adjustable rate mortgages, they were like trying to be screwed.
At first they could afford it, and they're looking only a couple of years in, oh, I can handle this, and then it adjusts, and then they can't handle it anymore.
And I think that not necessarily criminal, but I think it was very immoral, if you will.
It is immoral.
And
it's unethical.
That they were, in fact, it seemed like nobody, or very few, I should say, were willing or wanting to tell these people, you know, I know you like to have a house, but, you know, see me in a couple of years when you get a couple of raises or whatever.
Well,
I mean, really.
They weren't even asking people exactly how much money they made. They just said, put down basically whatever you want.
And we can do that. We've worked this out.
Yeah, it's no problem. Just say whatever you want, you know. Just
that was so wrong. So wrong.
Of course it's wrong. It's totally unethical.
Well, let me say, as far as I know, public policy in this country has been designed to facilitate larger amount of home ownership than you would normally expect. Think of that deduction on the interest with the tax that you pay, income tax you pay, can deduct the interest on your mortgage, right?
Correct.
And also, you have, it's either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. I think even both of them are involved with making mortgages more widespread, if you will.
Yeah, yes.
But the way that those two institutions were organized were, on the one hand, they have this mandate to serve the public as a whole, and on the other hand, they're traded on some stock exchange, I guess New York Stock Exchange. They have this mandate to sort of do what's best for their shareholders. There's
a conflict. There's obvious.
I mean, this is serving two masters. This was a disaster waiting to happen.
Absolutely, no question about it.
So I mean, but now here would probably be an example of where conservatives would say government manipulated things in a way that made things worse than they would have otherwise been, right? So, I mean, I guess we could be more like Europe, where they designed their whole urban planning, in such a way where most people live in, you know, like a condo or just a regular apartment. And they also They designed their cities more to have public transportation. So, you know, in this country, you have what made the suburbs possible was the interstate highway system. I mean, Germany has an Autobahn, but suburbs, the way we have them in this country, they're not like what you have in Europe.
No, we got a lot of these secondary roads that are pretty major, like state highway, like Route 10, Route 3, and 46.
46, 22.
Well, that's a U.S. highway. But
those came before.
Right, they came before, but they were enhanced and improved.
Interstates.
Okay, you drive on stretches of 46, you're thinking on a major highway.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that was, I think those roads were created as part of the first wave of suburbanization in this country.
I agree.
You got, in the 50s, you got the interstate highway system. That's like the second wave of
that was the post-World War II.
Right.
Well, there was a defense factor in that too, I believe. Wasn't it under Eisenhower that he was pushing that we should
Eisenhower did push that.
That we should have an interstate highway to help.
The Defense Department was interested, the military, in case they needed to take over those roads.
Right.
And for the purposes of moving military machinery, tanks and so forth.
As far as I know, he was inspired by the Autobahn that they had in Germany.
Yeah, that might have been the inspiration.
To get logistical equipment from one area to another. Yeah, but what it evolved into was a new way of life. I think they first set it up in the 1939 World's Fair. Something they showed people. This is what life will be like.
Some things came to pass and some did not.
Yeah.
And that, like everything else, has its pros and cons, that way of life that we have now, of suburban living.
I mean, you could say, well, this is a price for it, and maybe it's worth it to have, you know, on the one hand you have home ownership, on the other hand you have, sometimes you'll have these bad economic times.
Getting back to what you said about, you know, what some people would refer to as the American dream, the idea that everybody should be able to own their own home. Now, I don't know if that is everybody's dream. You know, there probably are a lot of people who say, well, that's not really my dream. I'm content to just live in an apartment or whatever the case might be.
A lot of people would.
But you said that you believe that not everybody should have the right to necessarily to own their own home, but I would think that maybe we should say that everybody should have the option, if they want, to try to pursue that as an objective, but realistically, not everybody will ever be able to own their own home.
And the politicians on both sides, and I don't mean that in the derogatory way, politician. I just mean people that are in elected office.
Right.
I use the term in that sense. Okay.
Yeah.
They almost always, at least on the national level, be it running for, like, say, the Senate or House of Representatives, or for the executive branch, meaning the presidency, you know, they seem to be throwing in now and then this thing about, we're going to do things to make it easier to own a home, or in so many words, from both persuasions of the political spectrum. And it just seems like, that's a thing that you're almost supposed to say, almost like culturally, in a way. It's been ingrained in us. And, but I think a lot of people live in apartments because, and I'm just saying it's a bad thing, and that your life is miserable and crap, but I think a lot of people have to live in apartments, be resigned to the fact, and that's okay. Like, I can't afford to go to New Zealand and catch gigantic brown trout, okay? But I can't afford to do that, okay? And just like if somebody cannot afford to buy a house, well, then you're going to have to rent and make the best of it.
Well, that's reality, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to create a climate again where homes are more affordable.
It would be nice, yeah, but
not just on terms of the loan availability or the pricing of loans, but also in terms of houses that are built that are affordable. I mean, there was a time that we just passed through where developers were building nothing but the really high-end homes.
It's still going on with the condos, isn't it?
It's
in our area, is that not still going on with that Vizcaya development?
I think so, of course. And I'm not sure you can mandate that, you know, that developers build homes that are more affordable for the working people, but that's a problem. When developers realize they can make more money by building the bigger homes and selling them for larger...
Like the housing starts, it seems to be more on the upper end.
Almost all of them are.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
And you see that yourself.
Sure.
With projects that you work on, right?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Well, in New Jersey, you had the Mount Laurel decision, which said that these towns, here's an example of government getting in the way. You have town, basically the New Jersey Supreme Court tells all these municipalities you have to zone low income housing.
Certain segment of
right, and they can, they can, Town A can pay Town B to put
use some of their
land for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, like Essex Fells, a very wealthy community.
Right.
Yeah, their low-income housing in proportion, the three of us probably couldn't afford it.
Right.
You know, and also there were deals made, and this is a little bit getting on the racial thing, but a lot of them, quite frankly, let's call it spade a spade, a lot of people don't like living around black people. Okay? And what some of these towns would do, they would basically say to a city like Newark and East Orange, I'll tell you what, they didn't say we don't want black people in town, but they would say, I'll tell you what, it's not logistically viable for us to build low-income housing, but you know what, we'll give you like a couple $100,000 to help out your community chest to do whatever. And these towns are so desperate for money, they'll say, okay, and they grab the money, and they don't really make a big deal that they are, quote, not able to move into a town like that. And that affects the economics too. There is racism in this country.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that you're rounding up people and murdering them.
Right.
But
or no lynchings or that
sort of thing.
It can take various, very insidious, sneaky forms, you know?
Yes.
No question.
Now, to put the conservative argument out there, I'm sure a lot of them would say Habitat for Humanity will pick up the slack for the low-income housing. You know, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, right. Jimmy Carter.
No, he's generally better thought of as an ex-president than as a president. Let's just be honest about that. But, it's
but it
tough.
is a problem. It is a problem. We don't have enough affordable homes or housing for people who might otherwise be able to afford a home, but housing is not there. The proper housing.
You know, here's something too. We're talking, and as far as economics go, and I told you about people with diminished benefits. Well, healthcare. I mean, you have many states in the union where a lot of people have no healthcare at all. And what I found rather amusing. I guess I can show some political slant in our discussion.
If you want.
Well, I think it's hard to avoid it. But I remember Rick Perry was, well, I am a registered Democrat, and I'm not ashamed to say that. Okay, so anyway, Rick Perry was speaking to a bunch of people in Texas, and he was really in the hunt for nomination.
Right.
And he was saying, you know what, down with Obamacare. And there were a whole bunch, and I'm being prejudiced here, but a whole bunch of redneck-looking people, real hicks, if you will, and it looked like half of them had no teeth and go, yeah, that's right. And it's like, wait a minute. The damn Obamacare is probably going to help you, clown, who probably have no insurance. That's why you got no damn teeth. You know, it just seems like there's more of a, people starting down with Obamacare, and they're not fully understanding how this may help them. In fact, most of the world, we are one of the few countries in the world that have the type of medical insurance system that we do.
Just about the only one.
It's primarily private.
Just about, I think.
We have Medicare and Medicaid, but essentially it's primarily private.
But there, it is
just about everybody else has a kind of single payer type system.
Yes, they call it either universal health care, and there's what they have in England, I forgot what, slightly different.
But it amounts to basically a single payer type system.
The thing that's really ridiculous is that, like my boss, Joe, I mean his wife was working at her old company. He was saying, and I guess he didn't mean to be nasty about it, but he said to us, well, at least I don't have to be on our goddamn lousy insurance. My wife's insurance is much better on hers. I think that's a ridiculous thing. Pardon me if I sound like a socialist. I think that's a total bullcrap. That you should say to me, well, my insurance is better than yours. Or you would say, yeah, well, my insurance is better than John.
It shouldn't be a competition.
It should be like...
It should not be a competition. It's not a chess game, you know.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be. But in this country, you can say, oh, well, maybe I'm not paid a hell of a lot, but I have tremendous insurance. Which translates into dollars if you were to pay for it yourself. But it's ridiculous, bottom line, ridiculous that your insurance should be better than mine or theirs. It should be the same.
Should all be the same.
Now that is socialism,
It
but I don't think that that's necessarily so bad. And we live in a mixed economy.
But
Anyway.
it's a mixed political system where we do have some things that are socialistic, like Medicare and
Medicaid,
Medicaid and Social Security.
And a lot of these
Tell me that's not socialistic.
And a lot of right-wingers are happy to have that, too.
They're happy to have it. They wouldn't give it up.
It's so funny. Some of these
They
right-wingers
don't want to
say,
give it up.
I don't want Obama to touch my Social Security. Well, it's
Where do you
a free...
think it came from?
It's an entitlement program anyway. It was the Democrats
It
that
didn't
pushed
come
it
from
for-
Republicans.
The Republicans they were fighting that. If you were to look at old, like newspaper
Sure,
articles about
newsreels
it,
or
the
footage.
Republicans were fighting this.
Oh, absolutely.
They were
Tooth and nail.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were fighting unemployment insurance even. They were fighting, it's.
Anything that's progressive, they fight, and they're doing it even now, maybe
Well,
more so than they've done in ages.
well,
Maybe you could put some historical
Yes,
perspective
let
on
me
that.
say
Barry.
something about this regarding Republicans and Democrats. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with guys like Wagner, Jacob Javits,
Sure.
La Follette. These were all progressive Republicans.
Fighting Bob LaFollette.
Abraham Lincoln, you know,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
not.
Exception.
The sort of political tradition that he left us is you can't directly trace it to the Republicans of nowadays, even though Abe Lincoln was and you can say similar stuff about Democrats. You know, Andrew Jackson nowadays would be he was a Democrat, but nowadays he'd be considered quite conservative. Same thing with a guy like Grover Cleveland. So the political parties in this country, they're just so mushy.
You know, we were talking about all this stuff about, you know, the connections, you know, between the economics and the politics and all this kind of stuff. And the one thing I find very curious, and I think connected eventually to the economics, is how the political parties have evolved. Now, the Republican Party, what I remember, and I was in high school in the 1960s, graduated in 65, and I could see the evolution specifically of the Republican Party from being the solid Democratic South, who used to vote with the Northern Republicans, especially against civil rights issues. And it seemed that in the late 60s, picking up speed in the early 70s, these white Southern Democrats were now becoming Republicans. And I find that very, kind of curious, but they were voting with the Northern Republicans as a bloc on various conservative type issues anyway, and social type issues. And another thing, sort of connected to this too, is that up until FDR, the black people, and I'm not trying to say that they were not being, that they were being stupid or anything, but they were voting for the Republicans because the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, okay, and as a loyalty, because they feel that he freed them, okay, that was like a loyalty, the party of Lincoln, and we will vote for them because that's the party of the man who freed us.
Like their obligation.
Like an obligation of sorts, thank you. But the thing is, when the Depression hit, the Great Depression of the 30s, they were realizing that the Republicans weren't very particularly caring about them or a lot of other people, and the programs of the New Deal were actually benefiting them and other poor people. And whenever you have hard economic times, the black people get hit harder always. Okay, and so now they flip-flop virtually overnight within say a 3-4 year period, to almost being entirely Democrats to this day. Okay. And it's just, it took a little slower time, but the people who used to be the white Southern Democrats back in the 60s and before, okay, now are Republicans.
Okay.
And I just feel that that's curious how parties evolve.
And sometimes they flip-flop. They actually turn around 180 degrees from where they were.
Well, if you know from basic American history, the founding fathers, they actually didn't anticipate political parties coming about, at least the way we know them now.
But you know the original, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists.
They did have parties even then.
But the thing is though, the Anti-Federalists basically were more like states' rights people, where they wanted the states to be more sovereign. In fact, they refer to states as sovereign states. Right?
Like their own country.
Own little country. And some people argue that the Confederacy actually did have a legal right to secede. Some say that that they actually did, but the North did not see it that way, or Union if you prefer, and so we had a civil war about it, and that ended that argument.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that George Washington suppressed the Whiskey Rebellion with force, you know. So it's that couldn't have happened under the Articles.
Oh, and that had to do with taxation of.
Right, but there was.
You're not serious, are you?
Well, like you have Martin Luther King was living in an era where we have Jacob Javits, Nelson Rockefeller. They're not totally forming ideologically.
He might have still had the loyalty towards the Lincoln Republican concept.
Yeah, and they still, progressive Republicans, if you will, still were, the rhinos as we call them today, they were still around. You could still find them. It wouldn't be too difficult. But, you know, I mean, and obviously with FDR and the New Deal, you know, he's able to create this wide coalition of, you know, traditional Southerners and African Americans and, you know, Midwestern people. That's how he's able to create a winning majority coalition.
Industrial workers too, man.
You know, middle class. And, you know, the real rich people were the ones FDR alienated. And it kind of slightly falls apart after World War II, but not totally.
Right.
But going specifically with the Republican evolution, you know, I mean, there's this, I mean, it's not, in 1964 you have this Civil Rights Act that Johnson, who was a Southerner, alienates the people that brought him to power, so Goldwater, you know, and then Nixon further solidifies that backlash that the Southerners deal with the Southern strategy, right?
Matter of fact, that has a lot to do with the, very much so with the transformation of the Southern Democrats, white Southern Democrats into the Republican Party.
Right.
That accelerated big time. Very much so with the transformation of the Southern Democrats, white Southern Democrats into the Republican Party.
Right.
That accelerated big time.
No, I mean, you may recall the former senator from, I think he was even a governor of Georgia, Zell Miller. It's kind of a holdover from that Jacksonian ideology of the Democrats, in that, at least in that particular region. And what do I want to say? I mean, then you got the guy like the two Republican senators from Maine, that they're relative moderates. They wouldn't be able to win the nomination, I don't think, although it's funny that Romney might.
But he's not, well, he's supposedly a moderate, but...
as a governor, he was a moderate. Scott Brown, the senator from Massachusetts, is basically just a moderate.
I think Romney talks real right-wing, but I think he's going to be...
more moderate.
I don't know that he even talks real right-wing. He's trying to.
He's trying to.
He's trying to, but he realizes he needs to do that to appeal to that.
If he gets elected, he's going to be like a moderate Republican, and the Tea Partiers and the other right-wingers.
They're not going to be happy.
They're not going to be happy.
They're going to feel that he sold them out and he, you know, double-crossed them.
Well, and this is something Nixon said about, he was kind of good with the strategizing. He said in the primaries you want to go more to the extreme, in general elections you want to go to the center. That's
probably true.
Right.
I think you have to.
This
you
book,
have to, because you're looking for the masses.
This book here, let me show. It's called An Economic Theory of Democracy. This is a classic work in the political science field.
Okay.
And in one chapter, the author, Anthony Downs, actually talks about the rationality of doing what I just described with Nixon saying.
Right.
You know, in the primaries, you want to go to the more extreme side, and then the general election,
you go to the center. To the center.
Get
the part of where people are more stable. You know.
Well, they say that United States senators tend to be more open-minded, whether Democrat or Republican, because you have two senators from every state, but you have many. Well, in the popular state, you have a lot of representatives, where a representative could be very, very tied in with his district.
Sure. true.
Yes, there's the gerrymandering factor. They want to have specific type of voters to...
But the United States Senator has to have that broader
appeal to the whole state and not to a specific district is what you're trying to say.
Gerrymander.
That's always been true.
Yeah, it's always been true, and it will be true, and will stay true.
Now, before we're discussing economic, public policy aspects of economics with housing and the like, and I have to bring to this, to make it a all-encompassing discussion, I have to bring up what's going on in Europe economically. I mean, there is a lot of people agree with this. There is a noticeable contrast between how Europeans tend to govern and which sort of policies they adopt compared to us. Clearly, they're more, they believe more in the welfare state than this country does, and that the traditions are such that
more socialistic,
are conducive to that. And you got what's happening in Greece that's too appetizing. So there's a wealth. So, I mean, Italy is another example. You know, they have that acronym PIGS, Portugal, Italy,
Greece.
Greece is the G Ireland, and in Spain, that's that acronym too. I'm not saying it in the right order, but
you did.
I mean, these countries have large debts to pay. Although I noticed that Belgium, which is not really considered a problem, they also have a large debt. It's more their debt to GDP, which is their economy's more than 100%. I think it's like 120%. And Japan's even worse than it. I mean, it's probably at least as bad as Italy, if not worse. But that's in another part of the world. You know, it's interesting with Japan. We're talking about how these relocations of employment with American Europe to the Far East. You may notice that the Japanese multinationals like Sony, Panasonic, especially with the electronic goods, they're also manufacturing in China. And I know when I was little, made in Japan wasn't too difficult to find, but now even that can be tough.
No, that's true.
So they're even farming work out to China.
And we talked about this once at the chess club. I know the guy that's recording this was there too that day. When how the Japanese, Japanese companies like Toyota, Honda, they're actually manufacturing in the United States.
Right.
In your old home state of Ohio, you're doing something in Mississippi. This is Toyota, I believe. They tend to not be unionized. A lot of the Ray Perrys of the world like that. But you know, there's some pluses and minuses there. Now, also, one of the best-known welfare states, or the ones most clearly associated with it, are the Scandinavian countries. I haven't heard too much about them getting into the problems that Greece has been getting into.
Well, they are, I think, pretty heavily taxed.
Yes.
But they knew that they had to do this to afford their universal health care. So it's like no free lunch.
No, there's no free lunch.
They get it.
You get what you pay for.
They have a very compact wealth distribution. Not too many poor, but not too many rich.
And maybe the homogeneous background has something to do with it, perhaps.
That may help.
Because we have a lot of diversity here.
I don't know how much a factor that is.
Maybe not.
I was watching something about education throughout the world, and there was comparing the top two countries in education are South Korea and Finland, believe it or not. And they do things differently in these two countries, but they were talking about could what they're doing in Finland be replicated in the United States. And the conclusion was no. Part of it was the cultural homogeneity of that society. It just makes their attitude towards education with
they're more cohesive.
Yeah, they're not going to.
The cultural thing has a lot to do with that.
Definitely does.
There's a lot. I mean, in Finland, teachers are treated, that profession of the teacher is treated the way that doctors and engineers are in this country.
More highly valued.
They're really highly valued, but you know, the way things get politicized here, it's much tougher to accomplish that objective.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that a lot of Europeans find rather curious, even Europeans that are relatively religious people, is why religious things seem to have such an impact in political campaigns. You know, it's like these speeches they make, they'll throw, man, I think that God wants us to do this.
Yeah, I think Jesus would be happy with
you know, and it just seems like the Europeans have, I'm not saying that we're primitive, but I think they're more sophisticated than us, and they've gone beyond that.
Yeah.
Of course, I am not a religious person. But the thing is, though, they marvel at how so much people make a big deal about, what kind of a Christian are you?
Right.
Can you imagine if somebody actually said, what's your religion? Well, I believe in Zeus, or I believe in Amun-Ra. And to me, my opinion, that's no worse than you willing to believe in a Judeo-Christian concept of a Christ, or you know. But it's
and it really is curious because our political system is supposed to have a separation between church and state that is not really at play. When you look at the particular Republicans, more so than Democrats, in this current campaign for the presidency, they're bringing religion into it all the time.
And you and I know that the early founding fathers were deists.
They were deists for the
they
most
were not
part.
What I call Bible thumpers.
They were not Bible thumpers.
Evangelistic types.
Thomas Jefferson actually edited, he had his own version of the Bible, he did some editing of the Bible.
Right.
There's some nice ideas in it, but it's a collection of fairy tales and fables. I'm sorry if I'm getting off the subject. But the thing is, all these things are connected and they affect things.
They are.
And there's this Protestant work ethic thing which has permeated the things here. It's kind of like, if you're poor, well, maybe God's punishing you because you're bad or something. And you're good, you're a millionaire, well, boy, God loves you. It seems, I'm oversimplifying it. It seems that
fatalistic attitudes, and that's not healthy. It's almost like the Hindu caste system.
Calvinism.
It's like you were meant to be a lower class person. That's why you were born that way.
And maybe you'll die, and instead of being a cockroach, you'll come back as a frog.
I think in Christian traditions, that's Calvinism.
Calvinism.
Now, there is something called the Treaty of Tripoli. This was ratified back in about 1800 or so, that said to say that America is not a Christian country. That's like actually in this treaty because we were having these feuds with the Burgundy War.
Oh, yeah.
But nowadays it would be
right, the Tripoli pirates and all that, yeah. They want to make sure this is not a religious war.
Right.
We're doing this because you're pirates.
Right, that was
Don't make like this is another crusade. It's not like that.
But the tradition of religion permeating our society with all these great awakenings, that's really held in America, and certainly does affect how we view our public policy making. You know, something like gay marriage or abortion, contraception. We're having that now.
Yeah, these are issues that they should not be politicized.
They shouldn't be, but they are.
But they are.
And as far as I know, we don't have in countries like Canada or Western Europe, or I guess South Korea, Japan, you just don't have as much of that problem between religion and politics. I mean, you have this in Iran, sort of.
Sort of.
I'm trying to say sort of.
Can you imagine somebody saying to Ahmadinejad, you know, you're really ridiculous when it comes to you thinking the Holocaust did happen with millions of Jewish people and other Nazi considered desirables being murdered. You know, but if you spoke out about that, you would probably end up being imprisoned or killed, probably.
Right.
Political action committees and these super PACs to donate unlimited amount of money to particular candidates.
That's a valid point. In terms of formally speaking, a lot typically would be classified as a Republican form of government because you don't have the stuff like the Electoral College and the Senate, which the Senate, for example, gives just as much of a voice to state like Wyoming does to New Jersey or California. So it's not...
On paper, we are a Republican form of government. Right. You have to look at in praxis or in practice right
yes,
now. How are we actually functioning? More like a plutocracy or an oligarchy.
Right.
And the moneyed interests, the moneyed classes are ruling and using that money to rule.
I've heard arguments saying that if we had something more like what typically exists in Europe, say the Netherlands, I'm pretty sure they have this, where any part, because it's hard to form a majority, so...
They have things where they say their government fell apart and they have an election where we can have a highly ineffective president. Maybe either he's not that good or because Congress isn't working with him, and you're stuck with him for 4 years. I mean, whether he's a good man or not, you've got to stay with that for 4 years and have these intermediary elections, like for the House of Representatives every 2 years, every 6 years for the Senate, you know. But the parliamentary system, some people feel that's actually a better, more efficient system. Our director is...
Yes, so why don't we wrap this up?
Right.
So we see that politics does permeate a lot of things in our life, and there are many ways to look at things, you know, from a comparative perspective, historical, and I guess just statistical.
Cultural.
Oh, yeah, cultural, you name it. So I hope this helped the viewer think more critically about what's going on politically. Anything else about that?
Well, I want to thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun and it was interesting. I think I learned a couple of things here that I didn't already know.
I've learned some stuff too.
To be continued.
To be continued.